And here we are. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast Livestream. I am your humble host, Erick Stakelbeck, joined by our trusty producer, Daniel, with us once again. And already we have hundreds of people joining us. It will be thousands within minutes. It's 4 p.m. Eastern time here on the East Coast. And Merry Christmas to everyone. It's a great time of year, obviously, a lot going on. I know a lot of people are busy during this time of year. So thank you even more for joining us today here on this live stream. We have a lot to discuss. Wow. As I was talking to Daniel right before we started here, I'm just kind of pulling up articles on my phone that we'll refer to throughout the next hour, and I can quote from directly. Wow. I mean, the U.S. testing a laser weapon at sea as really a message to Iran and its proxies. That's a big story, and they tested it successfully. The big story today, of course, the Tehran Times, which is an official newspaper of the Iranian regime. Needless to say, it is not delivered to my doorstep every morning by the paper boy. Do paper boys still exist, by the way? We used to have a lot of guys when I was a young kid growing up in Philly with paper routes, make a few bucks. I got to be honest, I probably haven't bought a newspaper, an actual physical newspaper, in years. Like a lot of people, I wake up and I check online. I just read the paper online, including the Tehran Times today, a mouthpiece of the Iranian regime, which published literally a target list in Israel, a map of Israel. You can see it in the thumbnail for our live stream today, a map of Israel, including a detailed target list that the Iranian regime says it would target in the event of a strike against Israel. Folks, a major story to my mind, right? Call me crazy, but when another nation is publishing a map of a nation with detailed targets on it and talking about destroying that nation, that's kind of a big deal, especially when the nation doing the threats is in the middle of nuclear talks right now in Vienna with world powers. Nuclear talks, by the way, which are swiftly unraveling. We'll talk about that as well. I also want to get into the honeymoon is over between the Biden administration and the Israeli government. We've hit on that in the past few live streams. I'm going to hit on that again because, folks, there are signs that this thing more and more is becoming a tense relationship. Now, I know on the Israeli side, certainly they want to keep it amicable, and they are trying their best to do exactly that. But between Iran and so-called settlements in the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria, which the world calls the West Bank, there are increasing tensions. We want to get into that as well. And it's interesting because along the same lines, and we reported this last week on the newscast, the U.S. and Israel talking about joint military exercises to prepare for a potential strike against Iran's nuclear weapons facilities. So it's kind of back and forth here. Is the relationship solid? Are the two sides on the same page? Are they at odds? By the way, that newscast was last Thursday. I believe that was December 9th. You can check it out here in our archives. Hey, while you are there, if you have not subscribed, please subscribe to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube and click the notification bell so you get alerts every time we post a new video, including live streams, usually every Wednesday. I assume that when you join us for the live stream, this is kind of our special forces here, the real inner vanguard of the watchmen and women on the wall. I assume that most people joining us for live streams have subscribed already, but many times you haven't. So, hey, welcome. Join the team here, and we are building a community of watchmen and women on the wall for such a time as this. What times we live in. Hey, a quick prayer request right now, too. I coach, and we'll get into the news. We got plenty of time to get the news. Give me 1 minute here for a prayer request, because I know we have some great intercessors and prayer warriors here with us. And the great thing about the live stream is I get to share my personal story a little bit, and my heart a bit with you. You get to know me a bit better. I get to know you a bit better, which is great. My daughter, who is 11, her name is Leah. I am her basketball coach for travel basketball. And last night she sprained her ankle during a scrimmage. So she's kind of hobbling around today. So we love if you could lift her up in prayer and that she gets back on her feet in no time. I think she'll be okay. she'll be fine. I don't think it's a serious sprain, but look, she's 11. It's sore, and she hasn't had an injury like that before. Things happen. You know, she shot a jumper and she kind of landed and twisted her ankle a bit. She'll be okay, but just prayers for her. We would very much appreciate that. And I have to say, man, it is so fun to coach. As you know, if you watch the newscast, played basketball my entire life, played throughout high school, played 2 years of college ball, love the game. And coaching is an absolute blast. You pull your hair out half the time, but it's a lot of fun, especially coaching your daughter or your child. I'm sure we've got some people out here who've coached their kids, and you can relate to what I'm saying right now. You put a play in, and it all looks great in practice. Then the game starts, and everything's out the window. And it's running around and a bit of craziness, but it is a blast, and they are improving. Okay, into the news. Thank you in advance for those prayers for Leah, my beautiful Leah, the matriarch. And we have, let's see, we're going to have thousands of people already. We have 1,000 people with us already. We'll have many more before we are done here. And remember, quick reminder before we get into the Tehran Times breaking news, hey, send your questions. We have the Q&A session. We will be wrapping up this newscast, the last 15, 20 minutes, with your questions. So be sure to send along some good questions. Daniel, our producer, will be taking them. And I can see someone just wrote in the comments, and by the way, I can watch it all developing here. I'm scrolling down. We have people from all over the world. Kurdistan, love Kurdistan, love the Kurdish people. God bless you. South Africa, Texas, Queensland, Australia. I mean, this is what we have here in the live stream. How incredible is this? A lot of fun with you. Someone said dunk everything about my basketball career. That's kind of funny. I believe it or not, I used to be able to dunk very easily and dunk a lot. Now I'm just kind of dunking donuts. I'm retired, but in many moons ago, I did dunk the ball and I did it pretty well. So what a feeling that was. I miss that. But hey, God takes you on to new places in your life, and a place we want to talk about today where I haven't been, but where I've been awfully close to, in Kurdistan, as a matter of fact, Tehran. And we're talking about the Iranian regime. Let's pull up the headline here and get right into it today. And I hope everyone saw this. If not, let's see. It will be in the thumbnail, but perhaps I'll hold my phone up. This might be kind of awkward, but can you see that there? Hopefully you can. Tehran Times. Just one wrong move is the title. It's a warning from the Iranian regime. The Tehran Times is a mouthpiece for the Iranian regime. Just one wrong move, Israel, is the message here. And that is a map. You see all those little red dots. It's a detailed target list. It is a map of the state of Israel. And the Iranian regime, those red dots all over that map are targets that they say they will target in any future attack against Israel. Now, some of the details, the headlines here from the Times of Israel. Iran's state-affiliated Tehran Times issued a threat to Israel on Wednesday, publishing a map of the country riddled with markers as a reminder that Iranian forces can ostensibly strike anywhere they want inside Israel. More on that in a second. Israeli officials say, that's not factually correct. The map shows all the markers along the entire length and breadth of Israel. And the article opens, this article, basically an Iranian regime article in one of their official mouthpieces, the Tehran Times. It warns that an intensification of the Israeli military threats against Iran seems to suggest that the Zionist regime has forgotten that Iran is more than capable of hitting them from everywhere. And it goes on to talk about the visits last week from Benny Gantz, the Israeli defense minister, and the head of Mossad, Israel's spy agency, to Washington, D.C. to meet with American officials, where they look, as I mentioned at the top here in the live stream, they talked about a plan B. The Iran nuclear talks in Vienna, surprise, surprise, clearly are not going very well. Okay, if the talks unravel, what's plan B? You and I both know what plan B is, folks. It is likely a military strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. And the U.S. and Israel discussed that last week in D.C. and the Iranian regime knows that they discussed it. It was pretty much in the public domain. Reports of the meetings came out. So they're publishing this paper in the IDF also, in the Tehran Times. Look, sometimes people say, hey, why are you sharing this sensitive information? Folks, look, if I know it, it's already out there most of the time. Sometimes we'll give you information, exclusive stuff from our conversations with officials. But if it's a big deal like this, like, hey, there's a military drill and I'm reporting that, it's already out there and it's in the public domain. Just so you know, I'm not revealing top secret information or sensitive Israeli military secrets. I would never do that. So that's out in the public domain. If I'm reporting on something like that, that's out in the public domain. If I'm reporting on an off-the-record conversation or a conversation with an official in the U.S., Israel, someplace else, that might not be public domain. So just to have that straight, I'm not compromising anyone's security, would never do that. It quoted also this Tehran Times piece, Major General of the Iranian Armed Forces saying, at the strategic level, we are ready for a decisive response and a quick and tough offensive against the enemy. The paper then cited Iran Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei's remarks in 2013 that if Israel strikes Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran will destroy Tel Aviv and Haifa. And the newspaper concludes by saying, keep your hands off to Israel. So this is a shot across the bow and a preemptive warning by the Iranian regime, clearly in one of their official state mouthpieces, the Tehran Times. So what are we to make of this? Number one, Israeli officials, in response to this piece today, said, no. Iran cannot hit us anywhere. By the same token, certainly any Iranian strike, and you saw all those red markers covering that map of the state of Israel, which, by the way, is the size of the state of New Jersey. Just a reminder, I've spent a lot of time in Jersey. It's not a big state. You can traverse the state in an entire day. You can do the same in Israel. But the markers on that map, for that to become a reality, for the Iranian regime's plan to become a reality, it's a bit tough for Iran to hit all points in Israel, perhaps because of the geographic distance. That's where Iran's proxies come in. They are perched on Israel's borders. We've talked about this many, many times on the newscast. We call it the ring of fire that surrounds Israel right now. It is an Iranian ring of fire, with Hezbollah, chief among them, to the north of Israel, in southern Lebanon on Israel's border, armed to the teeth with probably at least 150,000 rockets and missiles aimed at every inch of Israel. You have Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, of course, in Gaza to the southwest. You have the Houthis in Yemen. More on them in a second. Important development there. The Houthis in Yemen to Israel's south, also armed with attack drones and rockets, missiles. Then in Syria, of course, and Iraq to the north, the east, these Iran-backed Shia militias, and Iran itself, Iranian forces, Hezbollah forces, again, rockets and missiles. That's why we call it the ring of fire that is surrounding Israel right now, essentially on all sides. Can Iran make that map that was published in the Tehran Times with all those little red dots of the potential targets? Could they make that a reality on their own? Perhaps not. That's what the Israeli officials were talking about. But through their proxies, could they make it? I'm sad to say. Could they make it a reality? I'm sad to say, folks, absolutely. I think they could. With that ring of fire, Iran essentially can hit all points in the state of Israel. I'm loath to say that. I don't like saying that, but we call it like we see it here on the Watchman Newscast, and that's a fact. I think we had a preview of that in May during that Hamas war, when was it 4,300 rockets were launched out of Gaza by the likes of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Iranian proxies both. And these rockets, a few things. I mean, I was on the ground literally a few days after that war ended. As you know, if you watch a newscast, we reported from on the ground from the Gaza border in May and early June, earlier this year, 2021, in the wake of that war. And you know, if you were watching our reporting here in the newscast, that number one, these rockets had larger payloads. They were essentially deadlier And that's thanks to Iran, no doubt. In fact, some of these rockets are literally stamped with made in Iran, the Iranian seal of approval. There is Farsi, the Farsi language on some of these rockets. This is from Iran. This weaponry, the training, the components to make the rockets supplied by Iran. So payload's bigger. But when we talk about blanketing the entire map of Israel, clearly what was shown in that May war was that the distance is greater. Hey, basically Hamas showed in May, and to an extent, they also showed in the summer of 2014, almost 8 years ago now, hard to believe, but that was also another prolonged conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Look, they can reach Jerusalem, they can reach Tel Aviv, they can reach Haifa, they can reach deep, even to the Galilee now, and point south as well. So Hamas can essentially cover or reach most points in Israel right now. Hezbollah certainly can. So that map is not, and again, I hate to say this, that map is not outside the realm of possibility in terms of it being feasible. Like, okay, Iran and its proxies do have the ability to do that. Would they do it? How would that develop? Would Iran strike preemptively? I don't think they would do that, at least not yet. I think they're a very patient regime. I know they're a very patient regime. Remember, the game of chess was invented in ancient Persia, which is modern day Iran. So they're nothing if not patient and tacticians. So if the day came when they felt it was time to make, and they had the ability, and I guess you would say the ability to withstand a counterattack from Israel, then perhaps Iran and its proxies would strike preemptively. That is certainly not outside the realm of possibility. But I think this article in the Tehran Times is more saying, hey, if you dare strike our nuclear facilities, if Israel, the U.S., very likely, as we'll mention in a minute, Israel alone, if you strike our nuclear facilities, this is how we will respond. So Iran's not necessarily here talking about a preemptive strike, which, believe me, folks, if they felt they had the capability to do that successfully and survive the counterattack, they would do it without a doubt. They are committed to the destruction of the state of Israel. Their ideology quite literally demands it. So make no mistake about that. But this Tehran Times piece, which I quoted from, is talking more about a response. Let's look at some comments right now and see who we have checking in. We have South America here. We have South Africa, South America. We had Azerbaijan, Kurdistan. Let's see. We have Hawaii. It's amazing. It's amazing what we can do in this day and age. For all the bad of the web and the internet, obviously today, the good of it you see right here on this Watchman Newscast live stream, where we're able to literally communicate with people around the world and share in all this. I think once again, it tells you the times we are living in, folks. Know the signs, know the times. We are, I think, in many ways here, the modern day men and women of Issachar. The Bible talks about the sons of Issachar. They knew the times. It was this elite group of 200 men who surrounded King David. The Bible says they knew the signs, they knew the times, and they knew what Israel should do about it. We need some sons, some daughters of Issachar today, right now. And it's really cool how we can connect here with people around the world. Hey, this was not possible not too long ago, right? Where we're all on this live stream, this live chat together. I have someone from South Carolina on here right now, and also someone from Kenya, and they're commenting together at the same time, and we're interacting with each other. Hey, the prophet Daniel talked about, in the latter days, knowledge would increase and men would travel to and fro. Do we not see that right now with the capabilities we have? So technology can be a wonderful thing when it's used for God's purposes and for good purposes, like we're doing right now. So I just had to say that, because we have Scotland, Tennessee, Sweden we have here as well. I love to see that. Welcome, everyone. God bless you all. Hey, I'm a guy from a little neighborhood in Northeast Philadelphia. So to be talking to people around the world is always a thrill for me. It never gets old. I never, ever will take it for granted. And if I did somehow get a big head someday, my wife is very tough, and she would kind of smack me back into reality. She's a tough Philly girl. I can assure you of that. So I will stay humble for sure. Okay, Tehran Times piece. Let me know what you think about that. If Iran could pull this off, let me know in the comments. And if you have any questions here as well. We have a troll here, Lord of the Night Watch, that we can remove. I see him here right now. Let's see. We have another piece I want to get into as well. This is one I think you'll find interesting, folks. U.S. Navy fires laser weapon in Mideast amid drone boat threat. The U.S. Navy announced Wednesday that it tested a laser weapon and destroyed a floating target in the Mideast, a system that could be used to counter bomb-laden drone boats deployed by Yemen's Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. Now, the test took place yesterday, Tuesday, December 14th, and it was the amphibious transport dock ship called the Portland. It test fired it, let's see, a laser weapon at the target in the Gulf of Aden, that body of water separating East Africa from the Arabian Peninsula. The Navy says, the U.S. Navy, the Fifth Fleet, said they successfully engaged the target with this laser weapon. And this ship, the Portland, used a laser to bring down a flying drone previously in May 2020. Wow. I mean, this shows you the extent. This, if you listened to the article I was just quoting from the Navy Times, this shows you the extent to which the Houthis are becoming a major issue. The Houthi rebels, right? It's just this ragtag band of rebels in the deserts of Yemen, a backwards place. Hey, these laser weapons that the U.S. was testing are specifically geared towards preventing Houthi attacks against shipping in the Red Sea, against U.S. vessels in the waters of the Middle East, against Israeli vessels as well. Isn't that amazing? This so-called ragtag bunch of Houthi rebels have had that kind of impact where literally the most powerful military in the world is now specifically testing weapons geared towards preventing drone attacks from the Houthis. A few things to unpack here. Number one, the Biden administration back in January, literally days after he came into office, removed the Houthis from the State Department's list of designated state sponsors of terrorism. Why they did that, I was going to say I have no idea, but actually I have a very good idea. They did that as an olive branch to the Iranian regime right out of the gate, because the Houthis are an Iranian proxy. Make no mistake about it. So right away, the Houthis are removed from the state sponsor of terrorism list. And ladies and gentlemen, what message did that send to the Houthis? Did they suddenly say, you know what? We are going to behave ourselves now. We're going to renounce terrorism and distance ourselves from our benefactors in Tehran? No, predictably, the opposite happened. Appeasement always breeds more violence, more adventurism on the part of terror groups and rogue regimes. That's exactly what happened. The Houthis said, man, we're off the hook now. Let's go crazy. America's not going to do anything. They just removed us from the state sponsor of terror, from not the state sponsor. I'm sorry, but the Houthis are a designated terrorist organization. State sponsor would be Iran, Syria, Cuba, North Korea. Obviously, the Houthis are not a state. They're an organization. They would like to consume a state, the nation of Yemen, and they have conquered large areas of that country, but they are a designated organization, much like the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps were under the Trump administration, which, hey, the Trump administration under Mike Pompeo there at the State Department designated the Houthis. And then, like much of the Trump agenda, once Biden came into office, that was turned on its head, and he reversed many of President Trump's moves, including in the foreign policy realm, which I think has been a grave mistake in many ways, especially in the Middle East. Now, the Houthis were removed from the list. That's number one. Second thing to remember, the Houthis have conducted a virtual onslaught against Saudi Arabia over the past few years, and it has intensified to the point, and we talked about this on last week's live stream, to the point where the Saudis are pleading, and that was the term used last week in these media reports, pleading with the US, Europe, and its Gulf allies to replenish Saudi Arabia's missile defense systems. They are apparently running low on missiles that would be used in those batteries, the projectiles that would be used to shoot down incoming drones and incoming missiles fired by the Houthis. Basically, Saudi Arabia finds itself in much the same way that Israel has found itself over the past 2 decades, subject to a constant barrage of rockets and attack drones. The Saudis are in this situation, folks, right now. The Houthis have relentlessly bombarded the Saudi kingdom with rockets and attack drones. I mean, and a broad range of targets from military, civilian, even some of the royal kingdom, some of the palaces itself have been targeted. The Saudis have done a pretty good job of shooting down many of these incoming projectiles, but it's a constant threat. So the Saudis certainly can relate to what Israel lives with every day now. Look, under obviously constant bombardment by Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, and the threat of bombardment out of Lebanon and Syria. So the Houthis becoming a major threat. Not only that, they have made noise and made it very clear that in a future conflict with Israel, we talk about the Houthis being a part of that Iranian ring of fire. The Houthis say that they are going to throw their hats in the ring and they want to get involved. And they were itching to get involved in May and fire some rockets and send off some drones. It was about a year ago, or almost a year ago, January 2021, when Israel actually moved one of its Iron Dome missile defense batteries to Eilat on the Red Sea, the southernmost point in the state of Israel, specifically to defend against potential attacks coming from Yemen, about 1,000 miles south of Israel there off the coast of the Red Sea. So the plot thickens, but the U.S. Using this laser weapon, very interesting, and sending a message to Iran and its proxies. That's a good thing. For all the noise about the Iranian nuclear deal and all the noise about the U.S. appeasing Iran, and certainly there's plenty of that out there, and it's tangible. It's not just noise. We see it at the negotiating table in Vienna. It's good to see when the U.S. does flex its muscles to the likes of the Iranian regime and say, hey, wait a minute. We're not going to let the Houthis pack a boat with explosives, a remote-controlled boat, a drone boat with no one on it, controlled remotely, packed with explosives, and ram it right into a U.S. ship or international shipping or something like that. We're not going to let it happen, and that's why we're testing these laser weapons to send a message. Is there teeth? Is there real teeth behind that kind of display of force from the U.S. under the Biden administration? I think that's the big question. Is there real teeth when the U.S. says, hey, Israel, let's perhaps train together a joint military exercise in preparation for a potential strike against Iran's nuclear facilities if these talks unravel? Do they really mean what they say? Folks, I have no doubt that Israel means what it says when it says, and Israeli officials across the board have said, we will not allow Iran to go nuclear under any circumstances. We do have, I see in the comments here, some interesting chats going on right now that are not related to what we're talking about right now. So if we can moderate someone called Rapture Ready there, talking about the flat earth, let's get that out of there and talk. Let's keep it focused on what we're talking about. But is there real teeth behind what the United States is saying when it says we will not allow Iran to go nuclear? I know Israel means what it says. I think the Afghanistan effect, which we've talked so much about here on the newscast, has everyone questioning, and for good reason. After what happened in Afghanistan, that, hey, whether you agree that the U.S. should have withdrawn, or if you think the U.S. should have stayed, okay, we can have an intelligent debate about that. But universally, I think it should be agreed that the way the U.S. withdrew was an absolute disaster and an embarrassment, shameful on the world stage. I think that's very hard to debate, no matter where you stood on the issue. Okay, we should have stayed, we should have gone. The way it was done was a debacle. As a proud, patriotic American who loves my country, it grieved me to see the way it was done. It was an absolute disaster. And folks, clearly, China, Russia, and Iran were at the front of the line of rogue regimes taking notes and taking the measure of Joe Biden and saying, this guy's not going to do anything. And that's why we have all the noise right now. And we talked about this on the newscast last week. Again, check out in our archives if you miss anything and give us a subscribe while you're there. This is why there's a good chance after the Beijing Olympics this winter that you're going to hear more chatter about China targeting Taiwan. Again, God forbid. No one wants to see that, but it's pretty clear that that is China's plan to eventually consume Taiwan, I guess you would say, bring it under the fold of the communist regime in Beijing. And when weakness is shown by the United States, those timetables all of a sudden get ramped up. China might have said, hey, we'll do it in like 2028 or 2030. Now China might be saying, let's do it soon while this current administration in the US is still in office and take advantage of their weakness. Same with Russia. In regards to Ukraine, January, February, that's some of the noise, some of the chatter we're hearing. Could Russia potentially invade Ukraine? And Iran, of course. Will Iran, the Iranian regime, be more prone to, let's say, adventures in the Middle East and beyond because they don't fear repercussions? All of these rogue regimes, the Taliban in Afghanistan, even someone, North Korea, of course, a completely unpredictable situation. And then someone like an Erdogan in Turkey, who is ostensibly a NATO member, but you know what I call the Turkish regime here in the newscast, NINO, NATO in name only, not the people of Turkey. It's the regime there under Erdogan that is the problem. So you have a lot of bad actors, I guess you would say, who are very eager to flex their muscles and to expand their territory geographically and do a lot of nasty things. And if there is no check on them, bad things can certainly happen. So the Afghanistan effect lives on a few months after that disastrous withdrawal in August. And now we have these Iranian nuclear talks unraveling. We have European and U.S. diplomats saying, this ain't good. It's not working out. So then what happens? That's why it's almost obligatory for the Biden administration to talk about a plan B now. But again, is there teeth? Is that the right term to use? I guess teeth. Is there bite to it? I guess you would say. It might sound kind of weird, but is there bite? There's a lot of bark, but is there bite? I want to pull up this piece that I think you will find interesting from the Jerusalem Post. Here's one for you. The Biden administration, this goes to the conversation we're having. The Biden administration is obsessed with the issue of Israeli settlements. Here we go. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, in his meetings, which we mentioned last week with Benny Gantz, the defense minister of Israel, was in Washington, D.C. for meetings. Blinken insisted on the devotion of equal time to Iran and settlements in his meeting with Gantz. So he's putting the building of Israeli homes and Israeli communities in the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria, where Jews lived over 3,000 years ago. Blinken is putting that on par, apparently, according to this piece in Jerusalem Post, which is quoting Israeli diplomatic sources, he's putting that on par with the Iran nuclear threat. This is upside down, shall we say? Let's read on here in the Jerusalem Post. The Biden administration has put the issue of settlements on the same level as the Iranian nuclear threat in its discussions with Israeli officials, multiple Israeli diplomatic sources said in recent days. The Americans bring up, quote, settler violence all the time, obsessively, a senior diplomatic source in Jerusalem lamented. When Defense Minister Benny Gantz was in Washington last week to implore the Americans to take a tougher stance against the Iranian nuclear threat. Here's Exhibit A. Pull out of those nuclear talks. Get out of them. It's a feeble attempt anyway. It's a charade. When Gantz said, hey, take a tougher stance, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken insisted they devote equal time to discussing settlements as they did to Iran, which Israeli diplomatic sources found baffling. I wonder why. Blinken told Gantz that the Israeli government's settlement activity is destroying the chance of a two-state solution. Now, other Israeli sources said that description is inaccurate, but folks, to me, it rings true. I wasn't in the meeting clearly, but Blinken told Gantz that Israeli settlements are destroying the chance of a two-state solution. Not Hamas terror, not the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas and his pay-for-slay program, where the Palestinian Authority, quite literally, gives payments to the families, the loved ones of Palestinian terrorists who murder and maim not only Israelis, but American civilians as well. I present you the name of a brave U.S. serviceman named Taylor Force, who was murdered on the streets of Jaffa by a Palestinian terrorist, stabbed to death. And that terrorist was awarded by the Palestinian Authority with lifetime payments, a lifetime stipend to his family for his wicked deed. And this is an American citizen, Taylor Force. And this terrorist who was killed by the Israeli police, his family now gets to live it up. They get a lifetime payment for the rest of their lives. Folks, I can't think of something more evil, more wicked, and more diabolical than that. If someone, say a Palestinian terrorist, blows themselves up and kills 20 Israelis, their family gets a lifetime stipend from the Palestinian Authority. The same Palestinian Authority, by the way, and by the way, not every Palestinian is a terrorist, obviously. I'm saying a Palestinian terrorist because this is the background of these people who are carrying out these attacks. I know not every single Palestinian is a terrorist before I get the comments here. Okay, you know what I mean. I would say an Iranian terrorist. I would say if it was an American, I'd say an American terrorist. Okay. But the Palestinian Authority for years has been the beneficiary of, at this point, billions of dollars in international aid. Yes, including from the United States. Now, President Trump cut that aid to the Palestinian Authority specifically because of this pay-for-slay program. That's why the Taylor Force, that brave serviceman I cited a minute ago, Taylor Force, the Taylor Force Act was passed in Congress. President Trump signed it into law, and it said to the Palestinian Authority, unless you drop this quote-unquote martyrs fund, you're not getting any taxpayer dollars from the United States because we are indirectly funding terror if our taxpayer dollars are going to your little pay-for-slay fund where you award the families of terrorists. It's not going to happen anymore. Abbas was enraged by that, of course. Israel's supposed partner for peace, Mahmoud Abbas, was enraged by this and said, we will never end our program for our martyrs, as he put it. So that's the situation right now. So to get back to the point, not to go off on a tangent, but I think that's information you needed to know about that pay-for-slay program. That's not Hamas. That's the Palestinian Authority, who is the official, I guess you would say, diplomatic face of the Palestinian people, who Abbas travels to world capitals, meets with world leaders, meets with U.S. presidents. That's his Palestinian Authority that is paying salaries to terrorists, to the families of terrorists, after they carry out acts of terror. And he is unrepentant about it. It's a part of the culture that he has helped build. We're going to give this man aid. So when you say that Israeli settlement building and Israeli settler violence is going to blow up, no pun intended, the two-state solution, we might be missing something there. We might be kind of skating past the real. The left loves to talk about root causes. How about pay for slay, Hamas rockets and terror tunnels and suicide bombers, and Iranian funding and Iranian inflaming of the entire situation Maybe that should be the first item on the agenda for Secretary Blinken when he talks to Benny Gantz, rather than talking about Israeli settlers and Israeli settlements. Call me crazy, but Jews, I've said it many times, Israel is a sovereign nation, and Jews should be able to build a home wherever they want. If they want to build a home in Judea and Samaria where their ancestors lived over 3,000 years ago, go ahead. You should be, maybe that's just coming from an American perspective, but I should be able to move in any neighborhood I want to move into. If I choose to live there and I feel like God is leading me there to that home and to that community, I should be able to live there. That's at least an American perspective, but I particularly believe that a sovereign nation should make its own decisions without being dictated to by another nation. And I believe certainly that people should be able to live exactly where it lived over 3,000 years ago today. I think that's a good thing to reconnect to the land and reestablish your roots. And the Bible said it was going to happen. Isn't that the crazy thing about it? Not crazy to me, very accurate and very sane, but that would be looked upon as crazy by the quote international community. So call me crazy, I guess. Let's see some questions here, some comments. Is that chat room calmed down a little bit? It was getting a little crazy there earlier, but we got it under control here. We got Daniel said we're getting rid of a few bad apples. You get some trolls. We have thousands of people watching right now. We have an awesome group of people joining us. But hey, you get some trolls in there. It happens, right? When you get to be the size that our channel is now, look, almost 410,000 subscribers by the grace of God, you're going to get people taking shots at you. That's how the enemy operates, right? Okay. We are going to get into questions in 1 minute. I want to see if there's a few articles I want to get into with you and a few news items. Anything else? Two quick things to mention. Then we're going to questions. We got about 17 minutes. It's great. Plenty of time for questions. Speaking about the U.S. and is there teeth? Is there bite? The U.S. tells Israel that new tanker jets, which would be key to an Iran strike, are not coming anytime soon. Gantz, during that fateful D.C. visit, asked the U.S. to accelerate delivery of KC-46 refueling planes, but was told those aircraft were unlikely to arrive in Israel before 2024. And I think if we're going to see an Israeli strike against Iran's nuclear facilities, it will come before 2024, in my view. I'd be shocked if, not shocked, but 2022, 2023, let's just say they will be very interesting years. So I don't know that Israel feels that it has time to wait until 2024. If these nuclear talks unravel, which it looks like they are, and if Iran continues that march to becoming a nuclear threshold state, enriching loads of uranium at dangerous levels, then Israel, and if the world is not rallying behind and next to Israel shoulder to shoulder and realizing that the Iranian nuclear threat is not just a problem for Israel, it's a problem for the region, for the U.S., and for the world. If that doesn't happen, Israel might say, we got to do what we got to do to survive, to preserve our nation and our people. The way things have been accelerating, folks, and I've just been feeling accelerate has been what I've been feeling a lot. That word accelerate a lot over the past several months. And Afghanistan was a part in that as well. But we're almost into 2022. You would think if these refueling planes are not delivered until 2024, you would think that Israel might not believe it has that much time to wait, over 2 years. And you would also think that as Israel draws up these attack plans for a potential, nothing guaranteed, key word there, folks, a potential strike against Iran's nuclear weapons installations, you would think that Israel is preparing for any contingency. You would think they're drawing up plans that do not involve these refueling tanker jets. And you look at the track record and the history of Israel and the daring and innovative and frankly improbable, miraculous military victories and raids and exploits that they have carried out since the rebirth of the nation of Israel, the modern state of Israel, miraculous rebirth in 1948. And you have to think Israel will find a way, because the God of Israel will find a way. He ultimately is Israel's strength and shield. And The word of God is very clear that when it comes to Israel, his land, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob neither slumbers nor sleeps. Let's get into questions. And on cue, someone asks, Eric, when do you think Israel might attack Iran? I think I just answered that. Good question. I think I just answered that. I would think if an attack comes, it would be, you would think, before 2024. But hey, folks, look, as far back, let's see here. Okay, we've got some good questions here. Really good stuff. As far back as 2012, we were having the same conversation. That's why I think a lot of times people say, when we report on what's unfolding with Iran and Israel, a lot of times people say, this is the boy who cried wolf. Israel talks about it, and never does it. So I could see why you might feel that way. But look, this is a slow moving process. But eventually there will be a climax to it, I guess you would say. It's not going to be pretty. Most likely, one way or the other, Iran will not acquire nuclear weapons as long as the state of Israel exists, and the state of Israel will always exist. So that's not going to happen. Iran will not acquire nuclear weapons. We had this conversation about a lot of chatter back in 2012, 2013 about an Israeli strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. It did not happen then, almost a decade ago. Back then, I would have probably told you, hey, it's going to happen soon, because especially under a Barack Obama presidency. So the Obama administration strongly pressured Prime Minister Netanyahu, who's the leader of Israel at the time, not to do it. He didn't do it. Not sure if it was completely because of that Obama pressure. Certainly, the U.S. administration now would pressure Israel to not do it. Although the administration continues to kind of give the illusion, at least, like, hey, hold us back, Iran, hold us back, Iran. If you decide to develop the bomb, or you keep playing games in these talks in Vienna, there's no telling what we might do. They're making that kind of noise. But again, after Afghanistan, and considering some of the other things we've seen, removing the Houthis from the list, returning to the Iran talks in the first place, given what we've seen, are they taken seriously when this administration kind of puffs its chest out and tries to make demands or lay down warnings? Are they really taken seriously? Folks, that is a key question. With all of the wars and rumors of wars in the world right now, that is a key question. And right now, I don't know if the answer is very promising. Because I don't see the bite. I don't see the seriousness by any means by this administration. I'm sad to say that too, as an American, and not only from an American perspective, but for the security of the world. I'm sad to say that for Ukraine, for Taiwan, for Israel. When the leader of the free world, when the nation that has acted as the leader of the free world since World War II and helped to establish the order of things, I guess you would say, in many ways, when it decides to abdicate that position and take a pass and step back, it creates a vacuum. And inevitably, the world's worst actors fill that vacuum. Okay, questions. Let's see. Looking at questions here. Forgive me as I'm staring straight ahead intently. I'm just looking at the screen. Let's see. Good question by Paul Willingham III. Eric, how do you think the U.S. pulling out of Iraq? We're talking a lot about Afghanistan, so this is, I think, a relevant question. How do you think the U.S. pulling out of Iraq will affect the stability of the region in the Middle East? And what does Israel think about it? By the way, someone asked, too, another question here about this statue in front of the UN. Have you guys seen this? Now, I can't comment on it. And Paul, I will answer your question in a second about the U.S. pull out of Iraq. But I can't comment on it at any extent. I literally yesterday was scanning through some articles and saw the picture of it. Is this really in front of the UN? Like I said, usually I'm digging in. As you can tell today, I'm digging into all this Iran news. I've been a bit busy, to say the least. But is this statue's really in front of the UN? Apparently, either it's there now or they're putting it there. some kind of creature where it looked to be a tiger or a lion with wings, if I'm not mistaken. Again, this was a very, very quick glance yesterday at an article and a picture. And it was the kind of thing where I shook my head and said, "Whoa, is that real?" And I said, I have to go back and read. It seems, according to our commenters here, that it may very well be real. Don't quote me on that. I have not looked in depth yet, but I will after this live stream. Thank you for the reminder. But hey, these are. This looks like people have rightly made the point. This looks like one of the beasts described in the book of Revelation at first glance. So that is something, just to put that out there. We've talked a lot about the UN here in the newscast over the past 2 weeks, and the UN's targeting of Israel. So that really caught my attention. And that is something, if you have not seen this, you can do an internet search, I guess, UN statue, something like that. I'm going to dig into it more when we're done here, because that certainly piqued my interest, and not in a good way. Paul, I will answer your question. I'm looking ahead at some other questions here. Of course, Psalm 83 and the Ezekiel 38-39 war. I'll answer that too. I know everyone always wants to hear about that. Okay, Paul, with Iraq, I can make this quick. We got a lot of questions we want to get to in the time we have left. The U.S. will leave Iraq eventually. Remember, right now, I believe we have about 2,000, 3,000 U.S. soldiers and advisors in Iraq, and I think about 900 in Syria next door. I don't know that they're long for the Middle East. Let's just say that. I think Afghanistan got it started. I think you're going to see the U.S. eventually leave Iraq and Syria. If they do it now, it's extraordinarily bad timing, because it will leave the impression that Iran chased America out. And you'll have the Afghanistan effect, then you'll have the Iraq effect. And people will say, look at how they ran with their tails between their legs out of Iraq and Syria as well. You can't count on America. Just my take. And especially if the exit comes as Iran, its proxies, not Iran itself, but its proxies, those Shia militias that we've talked about so much here in the newscast, if they are bombarding American bases, American personnel in Iraq and Syria with attack drones and rockets, and the U.S. is hastily pulling out, wow, will that be a disaster, those images on the world stage, and be a disaster for America's reputation and prestige. So I think, to answer your question, Paul, which is a good one, I think that is going to happen eventually. And again, we can, should they stay, should they go? We can debate that all day long, same as Afghanistan. But the bottom line is, I think we can all agree, you got to leave the right way and leave with the minimum amount of damage, certainly to your reputation and your standing in the world. And this administration, I'm sad to say, has not shown that it's cognizant of that necessity. Let's just put it that way. Moving on, let's see. We talked about chemical weapons this week. Two things. Someone wanted a chemical weapons update. This is an important one you may have missed. Let's see. And someone also asks, let's see, do you believe any country would use a nuclear weapon today? Wow. Any country that, commenter Michael Best says, any country that uses a nuclear weapon will result in mutually assured destruction. You would think so. Do you believe any country would use a nuclear weapon today? Oof. Man, I hope not. I hope not, Michael. Obviously, I would say, I'm not saying they'd use them. Key point here. But I would say there has been certainly some nuclear saber rattling between India and Pakistan over the past few decades. Would they actually use the bomb? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they do not like each other at all. And there has been some threats thrown around over the years. Both have over 100 nuclear weapons at their disposal. A wild card in Pakistan and a complete nightmare scenario would be if a radical Islamic regime ever gained control in Pakistan. Then all bets are off the table. Obviously, we hope nothing like this ever happens. But certainly, if we're talking about it, hey, India, Pakistan, some believe they've come kind of close over the years to a nuclear exchange. Not saying it would ever happen, and God forbid would ever happen, but that's something, Michael, I would keep an eye on. China certainly building up its nuclear arsenal, building nuclear missile silos around the country. We've reported on that here in the newscast. Russia with a massive nuclear arsenal. Could Russia use tactical nuclear weapons in the battlefield, perhaps? Is that outside the realm of possibility? You think of North Korea, next to Iran, the ultimate wild card, right? North Korea has the bomb and has a maniacal leader. Would North Korea use the bomb? It seems, is the North Korean regime suicidal? Because, Michael, as you pointed out, mutually assured destruction. You bomb us, we bomb you, and we all die. That was the status quo during the Cold War, right? The U.S., the Soviet Union had each other at nuclear trigger point. Neither pulled the trigger because neither nation wanted to be obliterated in response. Does Kim Jong-un, does that regime, do they have those considerations? It seems to me that regime wants to hang on to power at all costs. It depends, but he's a complete wild card. What would he do if he feels his back's against the wall? And then we have Iran, of course, which is perhaps the ultimate wild card, because Iran is unprecedented in the nuclear realm and having that capability, in that the Iranian regime is a jihadist regime. The mullahs in Tehran, the regime that's been suppressing its own people, repressing that country since 1979, is a jihadi regime. You would have, for the first time, a jihadi regime, a radical Islamic regime with the world's deadliest weapons, and a jihadi regime that has repeatedly and openly expressed its desire to destroy other nations, Israel and the U.S. foremost among them. Would that regime use the bomb? It seems that their ideology demands destruction on a major scale, because then when the destruction and the chaos starts, then the Messiah, in their view, the Islamic Messiah, the Mahdi, they call him, the 12th Imam, sails into the rescue. Not to get too in the weeds, I'm throwing out two terms there you may have never heard about, the Mahdi and the 12th Imam. Perhaps we'll get into this on a newscast over the next few days, so we can break down Iran's ideology a bit more. But when you think of that ideology, it's an apocalyptic ideology, okay? You think of the track record of Iran sacrificing thousands of Iranian boys, telling them to clear minefields and blow themselves up, and they'll go to heaven to be with Allah. When you think of Iran's calculus, where Iran, I think 70% of Iran's population is under the age of 30. They have a large population, 70, 80 million people in Iran, I believe. And they could say, okay, Israel, as the former Iranian president Rafsanjani said, is a one-bomb country. We hit Tel Aviv, the Tel Aviv metro area. Some 70%, I believe, of the Israeli population lives in and around that Tel Aviv metro area. We take out Tel Aviv with a bomb, Israel in many ways ceases to exist. Israel counterattacks and they strike Tehran and different cities. Number one, the Iranian leaders are underground in some fortified bunker. And number two, Iran says, okay, perhaps 30 million, 40 million Iranians are killed. We've still got 30, 40 million left. And they may say it's worth it to eliminate the Zionist entity from the face of the earth. To you and I, this sounds like madness. But to a radical Ayatollah in Iran, it doesn't sound implausible at all. It sounds very coherent, and it seems to fit in with their ideology. I'm not saying they would do it, but I'm saying if I'm Israel or America, I'm not taking the chance or giving them the opportunity to possess those weapons and to quite possibly do that. Again, their ideology seems to demand it. Man, I hate to end up on that note. It was a good question, though, and it got me thinking there and got me going. Hey, God still sits on the throne. And you know what? We're in a season now where we celebrate the birth of the Son. And I know Jesus wasn't born on December 25th, everyone. Okay, I know. But we are marking the birth of the Savior on that date. And it's the one day, in addition to Easter, that the whole world is really talking about Jesus. Which is a good thing. The world's focus is on Jesus, on the birth of the Savior on that day. So let's keep that in mind, okay? Let's keep the season in mind. Let's know that God Almighty still sits on the throne. He will never leave you or forsake you, and he will work all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. That means believers. So if you don't know him, you don't have that personal relationship, hey, don't put it off. Now is the time to get to know Jesus. And what a perfect time to do it during the season where we celebrate his birth, the Savior coming into the world. Be encouraged. Be encouraged. God is in control. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on the newscast. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Take care. Hey, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.